Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Conrad Weaver. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and sometimes controversial topic, plant-based medicines and their potential role in mental health. My guest is Todd Youngblood. He's the co-founder of Pneumo Gladius, which is a company working to expand access to these natural medicines around the world. Todd is a mental health innovator dedicated to helping veterans and first responders heal from trauma, PTSD, and addiction through alternative therapies. We'll talk about what these substances really are, how they've been used historically, and what science is showing about their potential to treat anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Full disclosure, I'm not advocating for the use of these substances. I'm merely wanting to learn more about them and the potential good or bad that may be associated with their use. So you be the judge, or rather, do your own research before you make a judgment call on their use. So let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Todd Youngblood. Well, Todd, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. So glad to have you on the program today.
I appreciate the opportunity to chat. It's great to be on with you.
So tell us a little bit about you. What's your kind of cliff notes of your background, and who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, my name is Todd Youngblood. I'm one of the co-founders of Pneumo Gladius. Pneumo Gladius is a platform that's focused on the expansion of access to plant-based medicines around the globe. So we are a foundational company trying to help expand access to these really cool new tools that people are trying and having great success with to improve their mental health.
So I have a lot of questions about these things. And of course, there's a lot of probably some myths that I have bought into in the past. So enlighten us. What do you mean by plant-based medicine?
Well, Colorado recently passed a Natural Medicine Act, just allowing people access to natural medicines. These are, peyote, mescaline is a natural substance. It's a plant that grows in the ground. Psilocybin, the magic mushroom. It is truly just a mushroom. You have iboga, which is, derived from a tree bark. You have ayahuasca, DMT, all natural psychedelic substances that have promising applications in the world of mental health to help people overcome symptoms like anxiety, depression, PTSD, or just, help to enlighten and brighten their days through the natural properties of these medicines.
Mm-hmm. So do these natural medicines that kind of exist in nature, do they come from like historically, like Native Americans, other peoples around the globe have used these things throughout history?
There's a lot of really cool research and studies and kind of looking back that's going on today in all aspects of history. The obvious one to us in North America is the indigenous Americans that lived here in America 20,000 years before us, and their use in North America and Central and South America of these substances to connect with a higher being, connect with a higher level of consciousness. They were using, peyote and mescaline is still a very used substance in the Native American community here in the United States. There are still a lot of religious ceremonies that were built around the use of psilocybin mushrooms, and ayahuasca, of course, is prominent in Central America. This goes back even further, though. They talk about the Greek times and some other times in history where they would have ceremonial rituals and they would drink this special wine, and they believed that the wine that they're finding that ergot was in the wine vessels that they were drinking. And ergot is a powerful psychedelic that would help you get to not just a happy drunken state, it would maybe elevate you to more of an enlightened state. And they were talking about some of the famous philosophers and mathematicians in the Greek times going and doing this specific ceremony with this wine and maybe gaining enlightenment from more of a psychedelic or an enlightened state. So this stuff has been around. Obviously it's been naturally occurring in our world for hundreds of thousands of years, and we as human beings have interacted with it for a very long time. So this is not new to our society at all.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how or why these types of medicines, these types of things have had such a negative stigma among a lot of people over the years? That why is that, and how are you guys maybe overcoming that?
It's a really interesting question because the basic history of this, right, is it was legal for many, many years. Now all of those substances I mentioned are Schedule 1 substance according to our government and our DEA. That really restricts access to them. I mean, it is treated, psilocybin is treated in the same way in most states as fentanyl or methamphetamines. It is that same class of Schedule 1 substance. Now, it was legal. It was studied a lot in the 50s and 60s and 70s. A lot of professors were doing some really interesting work. There's a lot of great studies and examples of how they were using it to help scientists solve really difficult problems. They were helping individuals overcome traumatic experiences in their past. They were using it along with psilocybin-assisted therapy and other therapeutic methods. But it was also being used recreationally. In this case, it was being used recreationally for a population of individuals that were protesting the war in Vietnam, right? So they couldn't tamper on their right to protest. I mean, that's a natural right we have in the United States, is our right to protest. So they outlawed these substances, LSD, psilocybin. Obviously, LSD doesn't come from plants. Acid and all these other things that were just a part of that hippie culture back then. They figured it would be easier to outlaw those substances and prosecute them criminally on drug charges than it would be to prosecute them for protesting against the U.S. government. So that was a strategy that the U.S. government implemented. They stated that these substances didn't have any medical benefit, and so they were the same as a methamphetamine. We're finding more and more that is not true. There's been a lot more research. University of London, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, all these great universities have begun to do more extensive studies. I mean, they've done a lot in the past as well, more extensive studies to show that to treat depression, to treat anxiety, to treat complex PTSD, these are wonderful substances that can help reduce those symptoms in an individual's mental health.
So how do these, or let me ask you this, what can be or what is in your work, what is the long-term effects of taking these kind of substances?
So the nice thing about all of these substances is they're not meant to be taken long-term. These are not, your traditional SSRIs, benzodiazepines for, SSRIs for depression, benzodiazepines for anxiety. They're meant to be taken for, at infinitum. I mean, there's really no stop date for taking them. As long as you feel like you need them for depression, you have to take them for depression. They're really masking agents that mask the symptoms of your condition. Mm-hmm. With a lot of these plant-based medicines, they're built more for change mechanisms. They're built to help you gain a new perspective. Well, let's take psilocybin, for example. Psilocybin is meant to help you gain a new perspective on a previous trauma in your life. With that new perspective, you can reintegrate that back into your life and overcome that PTSD so it's not running in the back of your mind. I mean, that's the condition of PTSD, is it's always kind of present in your subconscious, and it makes us act in very unique and curious ways. So with psilocybin, it's not meant to be a forever drug. It's meant to be used for a specific purpose to help overcome a specific thing and then move on back to your natural life. The other element of this that's really cool in my mind is it's meant to help you create a better, healthier life and lifestyle for yourself, in the sense that, again, with psilocybin, you're doing a microdosing protocol for, maybe you're wanting to improve your diet. Maybe you're wanting to increase your exercise. Two common recommendations, like if you want to be less depressed, exercise and eat right? I mean, that goes back to Health 101. So psilocybin and microdosing protocols can be used to help with that change mechanism. Not it's not always that we have enough willpower to do this on our own. So it's a nice additive change maker to add to the mix. So if you want to make a significant change in your life to improve your mental health, because you're changing your physical health, your dietary health, it's a great additive for that type of thing. So again, it's not meant to be a long-term effect. And what they're seeing after heroic doses, to kind of go back to I think the context of your original question, like, heroic doses of psilocybin have been proven, to be like 60 to 70% effective in reducing PTSD depression scores to a point where, an individual would not consider themselves depressed or PTSD, considered to be having PTSD anymore. That long-term effect, obviously there's additional traumas that can come up in our lives. There's additional elements that we may need to overcome as well, that we may need to do additional sessions with, but it's not like it's going to reoccur or flare back up. That PTSD isn't going to reoccur or flare back up after 6 months, after 9 months. I mean, you've literally taken and reintegrated that new perspective in your life. Hopefully that integration sticks. Now, that's not to say there can't be additional triggers. There can't be additional issues that arise, right? But that's just with anything. That's just continuing on with life. It's just giving you a better tool to address that initial issue and then address future issues or additional barriers in your life as you go through it.
Mm-hmm. So what have been some of the results of people that you've worked with that are taking some of these substances?
So let's take microdosing, for instance. I work with individuals a lot with microdosing protocols where they're taking, a microdose of psilocybin is less than 4 milligrams of psilocybin. It's a very small dosage of psilocybin. A lot of folks are looking at psilocybin and the microdosing protocol as a way to help alleviate anxiety. So I've worked with several veterans, first responders, that are microdosing, to alleviate the daily anxieties of life. So they don't feel so anxious in social situations. They don't feel so anxious around work or just in specific situations in general. It is a very low dose, but, as that neuroplasticity builds in an individual, as they intentionally look at their anxiety, where the anxiety is coming from, they better understand their triggers and what brings on the anxiety. And what the source of that anxiety may be, they're able to operate in a much more lighter, brighter fashion throughout their lives. They may run through a cycle is typically a month long. They may run through a cycle or two a year to keep that anxiety tamped down, or those changes, or to make additional changes in their life. But it is a very effective tool to help tamp down that anxiety. So if someone is more functional in society, more functional in their life, and not having to walk around with that anxiety on a regular basis.
So would you say it sort of helps a person kind of deal with the things that they're working on in a clearer way, in a better way, so they're not, just, have this stuff hanging over their head, but they're able to have more clarity to really focus on what they need to fix?
Yeah, it's probably one of the most important elements too to kind of point out here is it is the structure and the protocol in which you engage with these medicines that make it therapeutic, right? There's a lot of recreational use of mushrooms. I have no problem with people recreationally using mushrooms, but I often get the question around, well, I've taken mushrooms at concerts, I've taken mushrooms with friends on the weekend or whatever, and I haven't necessarily had these profound changes in my life. It has the same properties whether you're taking them recreationally or medicinally, but we find the structure in which you take the medicine is kind of the construct that defines your results. Meaning that if you are actively setting intentions, I want to look at and better understand my anxiety as an intention. You go through the microdosing protocol with that intention. You journal about it. You note at the end of each day, like what made me anxious? What situation would I normally be anxious in that I wasn't anxious in now that I'm microdosing? And help to better understand how you operate and what to expect, how to kind of predict the feeling of anxiety and be able to overcome that and talk yourself down off that ledge before you let the anxiety take hold, is the construct in which you can overcome that particular issue. I'm always really, really careful not to just try to make this sound so magical that this is going to cure everybody's anxiety as soon as they microdose one time or they go through 2 microdosing cycles. But again, it helps you with that creativity. I mean, that is a natural byproduct of psilocybin, is creativity and clarity and focus and being able to see the forest through the trees in the sense that you can really help identify those core issues. What is really driving your anxiety? What do I really need to change in myself to address my anxiety? It could be eating better. It could be additional therapy. It could be looking at a traumatic event in your past that really kind of created that ego and self, that from a psychiatric perspective, that is driving you into feeling anxiety into specific situations.
Mm-hmm. Just looking at my own experience and I guess prejudices, if there is such a thing, related to these things. And you would look at how society has been so accepting of the use of alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mind-altering drug.
Yeah.
That we have. You can go down to the liquor store right down the street here and you can buy a couple handles of something and it will just knock you out and it will make you do stupid stuff. Right. But yet we have the general population has been so like, oh, don't use, magic mushrooms or don't use these other things because they make you do weird things, Why is that? Why are those 2 dichotomies? You have one substance that's readily available for anybody that's of 21 years or older or younger if you got someone to buy it for you. But then you have these other substances like what you're talking about that is such a kind of verboten thing, that we shouldn't touch.
Well, it is the stigma. It is the myth that has been woven around these substances. They can be abused too. I mean, that's where a lot of the,
Sure.
That's where a lot of the negative press has come through. I mean, people have taken high doses of psilocybin. They've done really stupid things. They've run down the street naked, chasing after purple elephants or whatever the event was, right? But you're spot on. Like there's a lot of people that have done a lot of stupid things after half a bottle of Jack Daniels. I mean, they've run down the street chasing purple elephants maybe more aggressively than somebody on mushrooms. So you're very right. They're both very potent drugs. They can be, a lot of people unfortunately try to use alcohol as a way to mask their depression or mask their feelings, deal with life's conditions. But the mechanics of the drugs are so very different. Where, using alcohol and having a couple glasses of bourbon at the end of every night, they're finding more and more that that's really not healthy for you from a physical perspective and from a mental perspective. It's not good for your brain. It's not good for your body. And it also helps enhance a depressive state. So like my community, the veterans community, the first responder community that you're representing, I know that it is such a common thing to get together for beers after work. I mean, drinking was a religion in the Navy when I was in. It was really scary at times. But, that is perfectly acceptable. But, because of the legalities, no one has really turned to, up until, the most recent years, natural medicines as a way to help better cope with the depression, cope with their anxiety, cope with these different mental ailments that bother so many veterans and first responders. So I think, being on shows like yours, help, all these other groups that are talking about natural medicines, that are talking about psychedelics, trying to normalize them as a safe substance if used in the proper context, if used in the proper amounts. There's one of the fundamental problems with mushrooms like psilocybin is you don't necessarily know how much psychoactive compound is just in the mushroom that you're given, unless you're actually measuring it. I mean, Colorado has is great because we can actually have mushrooms measured. We can know exactly how much compound we're taking. We can know exactly how much dosage we're taking for a micro dose versus a heroic dose versus a recreational dose. So you don't overdose yourself and have a bad experience, or be in an inappropriate mind state at work or somewhere else. It's not like alcohol where you know what the proof of the alcohol is. You know exactly what you're getting. You know how much alcohol is in the IPA you're drinking, right? It's already all measured out and right in front of you. So you know what your tolerance is, and you can have 3 or 4 beers to feel good. But if you have 6 or 7, you're going to feel drunk. So, very different states of maturity and like the ability to interact with the substance. I would love it if we got to more of a common ground with natural medicines where people understood what the substances were. They understood the benefits. They understood the risks. They understood the dosages and how to interact with them. They understood when they would need professional guidance if they're going to be looking at psychological issues, trauma, PTSD, going on a guided journey with somebody versus just going out and having a nice evening with friends and maybe having, a bit of mushrooms. Mm-hmm. So more purpose.
So how is taking something like magic mushrooms, how are the results of that the same or different than like smoking a joint versus drinking, a fifth of scotch?
I mean, what we know physiologically with psilocybin, let's just stick with psilocybin, for instance, there are very few physiological side effects that we know of so far with psilocybin in low dosage or recreational dosages. So if you wanted to have the glass of scotch versus a psilocybin, I think from a physiological perspective, you'll find, and please, listeners, do your own research on this, back me up on this, but you will find physiologically that it would be healthier just to have a recreational dose of psilocybin, to have the same level of intoxication that you'd have with a glass of scotch. With marijuana, I would say, from a smoking perspective, if you're smoking a joint, there's health risks along with the smoking of the marijuana. The ingestion of THC, again, more studies need to be had, but so far, like in Colorado, we were one of the first states to legalize THC and that product. There's not a lot of negative side effects. I mean, you are seeing some negative effects for people doing too high of a dose of THC, almost overdosing, maybe creating a psychosis in like smoking really high potent THC and overdoing it. But, if you're just, again, microdosing THC as a way to calm down, as a way to help you with your sleep, so far they found, very little research to say that is going to negatively affect you from a mental, from a physiological perspective.
So have there been any studies been done using these products, like doing like what Dr. Amen does with his brain scans? Has there been any kind of brain scan work been done to see what the brain does and how it reacts to these substances?
They did a really interesting study about individuals on psilocybin and, just kind of in the brains, doing under a brain scan. And they noticed something interesting when somebody did a hero dose of, more than 50 milligrams of psilocybin. It really shut down what they call the default mode network. So default mode network being what we would consider from a psychological perspective as our ego, our sense of self. So Carl Jung theorized that our self and our ego is built out of our experiences of our past. If we had abusive parents as children, that shaped our ego and our self. And what our ego and our self did later on in life, after that abusive experience as a child, it may protect you from having those types of relationships. Obviously, the relationship with your parents when you're a young child, that's the first connection. That's the first love. That's the first people that you saw as your protectors. And when they abuse you and they hurt you as a child, that just comes out sideways, in so many other elements of your life, right? So you're not as likely to trust. You're not as likely to form deep connections, deep relationships, because your ego is always trying to protect you from that type of relationship because they're worried that it's just going to hurt you again. So it doesn't always let you connect more deeply with individuals that you want, your new wife, your children, and so on and so forth. So what we see in brain scans when you do high doses of psilocybin is that default network shuts down. And when you talk about going on a hero's journey and gaining that new perspective on the trauma in your past, again, it gives you a new perspective of looking at that traumatic experience as a child. It gives you, because the default network's off, your ego's not protecting you from looking at that experience again. You can gain that new perspective. You can see that it wasn't anything to do with yourself. It wasn't that you were a kid that was unlovable, that was the primary reason that your parents were like this. Maybe your parent was an alcoholic. Maybe they were drug abusers. Maybe they had their own psychological issues. You can see the reality and the truth and who they were. They were imperfect people trying to be parents and raising this young child. And that's why it happened. It wasn't anything to do with the child, the self. So then you can renegotiate the rules of engagement with the ego. You can renegotiate and say, look, ego, it's really important for me to have a good relationship with my wife. It's really important for me to have a good relationship with my kids. And that new perspective, if you reintegrate it through additional therapy, through additional work, through integration work, you can reintegrate that new perspective with your ego and have a new agreement. So after the fact, you can enjoy that deeper connection with your kids, with your wife, with the people around you, and not have to worry about your ego defending you or keeping you from those deeper relationships.
This is an interesting conversation, just because I'm learning about these things. I don't know a whole lot about them. So who can use these? Do you need like a doctor's prescription? How does that work?
So Oregon and Colorado, we're very fortunate that you can go to clinics, and get help directly from clinics and facilitators. There's both, licensed facilitators in Colorado and Oregon. There's also individuals who have been practicing plant medicine for a long time that have been doing journeys like this for, several years, that now have access to the medicine and can work with individuals legally here in Colorado and in Oregon. New Mexico, other states are passing similar acts to Colorado. Texas just passed a research grant and initiative for ibogaine research in Texas. So there's a lot of opportunity in those states. There's also opportunities to go outside of the country, to go to Mexico, to go to Peru, to go to Guatemala to have these experiences as well. That's one of the things our organization at Pneumo Gladius is trying to do, is trying to connect individuals with the right level of services. So literally, if you reach out to us on our website, and you want to connect and you want to have a discussion about, what services are available to you or how you can access these services in a legal manner, we can help push you down the paths of working with organizations that specialize in working with veterans and first responders. I think that's another important element is I think veterans certainly have some unique conditions to their trauma, and first responders as well. I mean, the statistics are off the charts about the number of traumatic experiences first responders engage with in the line of duty throughout their careers. And I think it's important to have that context and insight into the realities of being a first responder, the realities of being a veteran, if you're going to work with these different organizations so they can, treat it appropriately.
Mm-hmm. And so what's the legality of like a first responder using some of these substances? Is there any kind of issues with their departments? Can they run into problems like that?
So I would say it's still a Schedule 1 substance in a lot of states. If you had a first responder that was microdosing and, was in Massachusetts or somewhere like that, they could get in a lot of trouble. They would probably most likely be treated like an individual taking meth on the job, unfortunately. But, right now, a lot of the legalities are very strict. I know there's still a big debate with, active duty military versus veterans. That's you notice that I haven't said active duty military, and I have been working with active duty military because it's the same type of restriction. And it's kind of the unfortunate piece is, you have these active duty military, you have these first responders that are on call and on the job, and, they are worried about engaging with these practices and seeking out these treatments because of how it may affect, their careers. Again, accessing the medicine in an environment where it is legal to access it, through a legal clinic, through a legal provider here in Colorado. There's probably some, I guess the best way to put it is if somebody really needs help, they're really just up to their neck in it. And, the probably one potential path is, self-harm in some way, shape, or form. I would encourage them to reach out to our organization, other organizations, and look for a path of healing. I think, more so than anything else, a department wants an individual to find healing and care and everything else, wherever that may come from. And I know it to be true that, with heroic doses of psilocybin, after 4.5 hours, the medicine has completely run through your system. It's not going to, affect your mental state, your mental performance, after the fact. I mean, you've completely run through it. So if you did this on a vacation, you could potentially get access to this healing and medicine. But it's a big conversation. It's a big conversation about risk, reward, precautions to take. Everything we do is anonymous. Everything we do is in confidentiality and privacy. It's, again, just the most important piece is like, if you're really in need, if you really need help, if you know somebody in need, if you know somebody that really needs help, it's a path worth exploring.
Mm-hmm. What can be some of the perhaps negative consequences aside from maybe, legal stuff with your agency? What can be some of the physical negative consequences of taking some of these substances?
So here's a couple big gotchas with psychedelics. So if you have a propensity for schizophrenia, for bipolarism, for some of these other psychoses, you really need to consult with a psychologist, to help ensure that that's what your diagnosis is and see if this is a substance to interact with. It can amplify those types of conditions. It can be something that, it can make those conditions worse. Physiologically, it's a very low risk. Again, just psilocybin specifically, it's a very low risk physiologically. It doesn't increase the heart rate. There's not a lot of conditions physically that is going to prevent you from taking this medication. I mean, if you are in terrible physical condition, if you were at risk of a heart attack at any moment, let's stay away from psilocybin to put you in a psychedelic state for 4.5 hours where you may have a physical condition or a physical, problem anyways if you're just laying around for 4 hours. But other than that, there's not a lot of physiologically that can go wrong. Back to the mental capacity, there's many documented cases of people having bad trips. Somebody is going to take a big dose of psilocybin. They're going to have the permission to look at the bad stuff, right? And they look at the bad stuff and they see the new perspective and they don't know what to do. They've just re-experienced that traumatic experience. They've not done it intentionally. They don't have somebody there that can properly guide them through in how to reintegrate that new perspective back into their life, or that experience back into their life, and help translate that back in a positive way to make positive change so they can go into a deeper, darker spiral. So there is a lot of risk in trying to cowboy this stuff on your own, to try to do this without guidance, to try to do this without education. And the risk is, worsening a mental state, worsening a depression, worsening a PTSD or anxiety. So you do want to be careful around this stuff. I would say another risk is using this substance as another masking agent. just like that glass of scotch every night. If you are an individual who is just looking for another mask to put on, another way to just numb the pain, while psilocybin doesn't have an addictive property similar to alcohol, it's certainly something that can be abused. I mean, that's something we look for all the time. When somebody wants to microdose a little bit, that's great. But when somebody wants something on a consistent basis to just have it month over month over month, that's a red flag for us. It really means that somebody is not actually making the changes in their life they need to make to be healthy afterwards, that they're just using it as a masking agent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of those kind of masking agents that people get involved in and to hide the pain that they're experiencing. And uh, well, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you kind of shedding some light on these things that kind of helps me understand it better for sure. And I'm sure my audience will as well. What can someone do if they're interested in learning more?
Um, a ton of great resources all over the place. A lot of great podcasts that are talking about this. Your podcast, obviously, but there's a lot of information just to be found on YouTube. I would just caution people to go to trusted sources, trusted individuals in the fields, trusted podcasts that are really talking about good mental health practices. There's some great studies out there from University of London, John Hopkins, and other pieces. Of course, if you contact our organization, Pneumo Gladius, you can find us online at pneumogladius.com. It's spelled with the P. It's a Greek. It's derived from a Latin word, so different spelling than you'd think. But what we always like to do is provide a lot of information on our site, and we send people a lot of information too. A lot of times, just like yourself, you haven't had a lot of experience, if any experience with these substances. So learning about the mechanics, learning about neuroplasticity, learning about the dissociative effects is an important element of knowing what you're getting into, seeing if it's the right substance for you, having a plan to try a little bit before you get too deep into it, and just so you can see how the substance affects you. And see if it's a delightful experience or if it's not. So this is not something that's necessarily going to be the cure all for everybody or everything. Let's not paint it in that picture.
Mm-hmm. So in the states where this is legal, are these things covered under insurance?
They are not covered at all under insurance. No, there's no coverage through the traditional medical channels at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, do you have anything else you want to add to our conversation before we wrap it up?
I think one of the things I'd like to express just from anybody listening to this is the need to expand access, to expand the community efforts around bringing these natural medicines to bear for individuals. They show great promise, but we need to research them more. They show great, they look like they're a great tool that can be used to help solve a lot of mental health issues, but we need more people to interact with these substances. We need more people to try it from trusted sources and really use them as the proper tool. There's just like anything else, as soon as these plant medicines start to show promise, the snake oil comes out in droves. I had somebody tell me that they were finding psilocybin gummies at a gas station in California. And I'm like, oh man, don't take those. I don't know what's in them. It's totally not legal to buy those at a gas station anywhere, much less in California. And I totally don't think it's a lot of synthetic stuff. It's a lot of garbage in those gas station medications. So be careful of the snake oil. Find your trusted sources. There's a lot of great organizations that are doing this work within the veterans community, within the first responder community. We really need a lot more people to get involved, whether you're in academia, whether you're a psychologist, a therapist that want to explore these treatments. We just really need a lot more great people involved in expanding access to this therapy. It has so much potential. We need to learn so much more about it, but it's natural, right? And I wanted to ask you too, in what you do for the wellness podcast, in so many cases, doesn't it come back often to a natural remedy, a natural piece? Like, let's stop eating processed foods. Let's go out and get more exercise. Let's go outside and be in nature more. I mean, from your perspective, when you talk about the general theme of wellness, is a natural solution not often an element of better wellness?
Yeah, I mean, just learning how to breathe properly, and we need to help bring your system down from a state of high alert, and I've recently I started walking more intentionally, and just being outside and breathing in fresh air and getting some of that walking exercise has really been good for me, and I kind of preach that everywhere I go now. It's like, get outside and walk. It's easy. Anybody can do it if you are able to get up and walk, and it's a great tool to use. But this has been a really fascinating conversation in a subject that I know very little about, and have had maybe some negative perspectives over it over the years. But I really appreciate you kind of enlightening us, no pun intended there, to show us kind of a little bit about what these substances can do for us.
Yeah, I appreciate the time and opportunity to chat more about this.
And we'll put a link to your website in the show notes, and people can learn more about what you guys do. So Todd, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Conrad. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Todd, for bringing more clarity and science to this conversation. For many of us, and myself included, this is brand new territory, but it's clear that research is changing how we think about mental health and healing. If you want to learn more about Pneumo Gladius, Todd's company, or explore some of the studies he mentioned, you'll find links in the show notes below. And if this episode challenged your thinking or gave you hope, please share it with someone who might benefit. And finally, please remember that you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.